We've all been here, correct? If you want to type it in the chat, yes, I've been here, great. I know this is not necessarily an interactive forum, but the more you guys can chat, I think the more you guys will get out of it. And Liana will be monitoring if anyone does have comments or questions. So we've probably all been here, stuck, whether it's a fork in the road, whether it's a project we wanted to start, whether it was a decision we needed to make, and we just couldn't take action. And we either felt that we had to just wait it out until we either had an epiphany or someone told us what to do, or we talked it over so many times that we finally just threw a dart at the wall and said, that's the way I'm going, right? I think we've all had experiences like that. And I am going to ask you guys to participate a little bit. Let's talk about what gets us stuck. When you're feeling stuck yourself, like you can't get out of the snow that's piled up around you. If you're all in the Northeast, we've all had a lot of snow recently. What gets you stuck? Just type it in the chat. Could be talking to other people, taking in other opinions, or something, a feeling that you have internally, but type it in. What gets you stuck? It'd be great to hear. Oh, perfectionism. We're going to talk all about that. Perfectionism. Yes, fear, Laura. Too much to do, Sims. Yep, I hear all of that. So only 20% of people reach their full potential. Now, that sounds very alarming, and it is alarming in some way. It doesn't mean that we don't reach potential and that we don't fulfill certain goals, but there is so much more that we're capable of if we just got out of our own way. And one of the reasons why this statistic actually holds true is because we actually get in our own way and we sabotage ourselves. You know, it's all about our mindset. And the good news is we're in control of it and we can change it. So that is a good news. Don't let this statistic depress you. Okay, our minds do sabotage us. And this is the truth. We have two brains. We have a survival brain, which is your left brain. And this is made up of your brainstem, your limbic system. And this is where our emotions live and our memories, and as well as our innate response to danger, our fight or flight response, right? This is a very primitive brain, and it's very linear and logical. If this, then that, right? If there's a threat, I run away. Very linear. We also have a rational brain. This is our right brain, and this is the middle prefrontal cortex. This is where we get the ability to actually observe ourselves, and where we're allowed to stay centered, and where our gut wisdom lives in this part of the brain. So you'll notice these are two very different parts of the brain. And when we're living in our saboteur state, we are in one part of the brain, and we actually have to learn how to move ourselves into another part of the brain, into that right part, the part that allows for empathy. Empathy is so important, right? When we talk about having compassion, not just for ourselves, but for other people. And this is a nonlinear place where we live in the right brain. It's nonlinear. We see the big picture, and it's really important. There is one theory in positive psychology that I believe this is based on. I don't know what Shirzad's specific research was, but in my studies, I know that Barbara Fredrickson has a theory called broaden and build and narrow and focus. And so when we're experiencing positive emotions, and when we are in our sage brain or our right brain, the rational brain, we can be broadened and we can see the big picture, and we're better problem solvers, and we are better at, making decisions, right? All things that we need to do in the working world. And when we are experiencing threats, or we're feeling, that we're in survival mode, which is what we are in when we let our saboteurs kind of take over, we're in a very narrowed and focused state. And that is very hard to see out of. If you've ever gotten into a downward spiral, you know just how hard that is to actually see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that it's not going to be like this always. And so that narrow and focus doesn't let us see the bigger picture. doesn't let us get out of our own way. So just to give you a little background on that, it's a great, great theory. So here's our goal. We want to weaken the saboteurs and learn how to step into the sage part of our brain. Okay, so first, what we're going to do is we're going to identify our saboteurs. We're going to then actively shift to the sage perspective, which we'll talk about. And then we're going to talk about how to strengthen the PQ brain. So when I say PQ, what that refers to is your positivity quotient. The amount of time that you are spending more in your right brain, in your sage brain, than the saboteur brain. So the higher our positivity quotient is, the higher PQ we have, the more time we're spending in our sage brain, where we are able to have a good look at ourselves, to take a big picture view of what's going on, and to stay focused and solution oriented. Okay. So how are we going to do this? Saboteurs, we are going to have to identify these. Everyone has an inner judge. What does your judge look like? We're going to talk about that. I'm going to ask you to do a small exercise and maybe type in what you come up with. But we all have an inner judge, that voice that tells us we're not good enough, we'll never amount to anything, or who do we think we are? Are we crazy to think we could achieve that? Everyone's judge looks different, but each judge lies to us. Now, the judge was created to protect us, and I'm not going to go too much into how the judge was created. It goes all the way back to childhood, and no matter whether you had a good childhood or a bad childhood, you all have a judge. I have one. We all have one. And it looks different for each of us. Some of our judges talk down to us. They're very snooty, and they have an air of arrogance about them. Other judges are very abusive, and they yell at us, and they really make us feel, small and tiny in the worst possible way. I mean, all of our judges make us feel small and tiny, but the way that your judge speaks to you is very unique to you and your experiences and how the judge was formed. But I'm going to ask you to just take a minute and think about what your judge looks like. How does your judge sound? What voice does your judge have? What kind of, if you were to visualize this judge, what kind of physicality would the judge have? Would it just kind of glance over at you and say, oh, you're not even worth my time? Or would it point a finger at you and really get into your face and maybe yell at you? So think about that for a second. And just, that's for yourself. You don't need to share that. The good news is we're going to get rid of this. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. You can never fully get rid of your judge, but you can make that voice in your head much smaller. And you can divert your attention away from that voice much more quickly as we go through what we're going to learn in the next 50 minutes or so. So everyone have their judge and ready to kind of kick it to the curb? Let's go. Your judge does not act alone. I see Katie says perfectionism, and Liana said perfectionism. Well, I think there is a perfectionist supporting cast of characters here. The controller or the
failures come up a couple times.
Say that again.
Failure came up a couple of times.
Oh, failure, yes. And that is really the judge, right? Okay. That is the judge loud and clear. So the judge does not act alone. The judge is telling us lies, like we're not good enough, in an effort, ironically, to protect us from harm. This is how the judge was created. And again, we won't go too much into it, but it was created to keep us safe. It served a purpose when we were a lot younger. And as we grew, it's lost its purpose, but we still are very tied to that image of that judge and that voice inside us. And it brings along with it a whole host of characters. So let's see if you can recognize these supporting cast members. The controller, hyperachiever, which doesn't sound negative, but we're going to learn all the defaults, all the faults of these characters. So the stickler is that perfectionism, right? And the pleaser tries to please everyone. they're all telling you lies. We're going to get into the lies in a second, but they're all telling you lies. And it looks like the lies they tell you, if you took them at face value, were actually things that were good for you. But they really keep us from what we want to achieve in the long run. And so it may give us a short-term sense of whether it's safety or a short sense of achievement in some way. We might make small progress, but we won't really make the big progress that we're looking to make if we keep listening to this cast of characters. So avoider, victim, hyper-rational, the restless. These sounding familiar to you guys? I'm going to tell you what the lies are. I wish I could hear you guys talk so you could guess what these lies are, but hopefully you have some guesses in your mind and you can, compare them to what the lies are on this next slide. So here we are, the lies that this cast of characters tell us. So here's our stickler. Perfectionism is good and needed. What's wrong with being perfect? Well, from you perfectionists out there, maybe you have some thoughts on what's holding you back by being a perfectionist, that it isn't really a good thing to strive for perfection all the time, right? We've got to strike a balance. There's a polarity between these. Some perfectionism might be okay, but when you feel it's holding you back, it's really getting in your way and it's sabotaging you. So if you are an avoider, right? You avoid conflict, let's say. Well, conflict is, unavoidable. If we avoid it, we don't grow. Nothing gets better. If you've ever had tension with a work colleague or a boss or even someone in your personal life, if you avoid that conflict, what happens? It probably stays as underlying tension, or maybe you just slowly lose touch, but you don't make progress. And maybe in your personal life, I don't want to say that's okay. It's probably not okay, but in your working world, think about what a roadblock that may be, especially if you manage teams. I'm sure you could probably see a lot of people avoiding conflict, and hopefully you'll find a good way to manage that. Let's see. What about the restless? Life is too short, right? It must be lived fully. I don't want to miss out on things. What's wrong with living life to the fullest? I want to experience everything. Well, in theory, it sounds good, but what was that we were talking about the other day, Liana, in our newsletter? Do less better, right? It is so hard to make progress in any one area if we are constantly being kind of pulled to, the next shiny object and trying then to do all of it. That gets in our way. It is a big roadblock. So if anyone is experiencing any of these, go ahead and let me know. It would be great to hear what you guys identify with. I wish my screen were bigger because I realized that I can't even see these so well. Let's see. Who is this? This is the pleaser, right? It's great to do things for other people. What's wrong with that? It means I'm a good person. Sure, but not at your own expense all the time. These are habits. So this cast of characters, they come with a set of behavior. And the other reason why it's so hard to achieve our potential is that behavior is a very hard thing to change. But if we work at it, we can do it. And we're going to move out of our left brain and into our right brain. So let's see how these cast of characters kind of play out. Let's say at work, you lose a big client. How would these different accomplice saboteurs, obviously your judge is there saying, oh, of course you lost it. You're terrible. They found out that you're an imposter, right? Of course, finally they figured you out. You're no good. But the supporting cast members also pop up, and your hyperachiever may have you be very controlled in the way that you go out for your next presentation. And if you're very controlled during a presentation, even though that hyperachiever is trying to protect you to not make a mistake, being very controlled is not great when you're giving a presentation. Your avoider may have you just procrastinate on making other sales calls, but that's not going to help you. Certainly not going to help you get another client. And you could also be the victim. You may not even recognize that there was some fault or that there's room for improvement. Maybe it was something that the client, they took their business elsewhere. They did this to you, but what was our role in this situation? So this is how these cast of characters come up and get in our way. So to revisit our goal, we want to weaken the saboteurs and step into the sage. So we've identified the saboteurs, and now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we actively shift to the sage perspective and what that sage perspective is like. Just to take a temperature read, is everybody identifying with, if not the judge, but the cast of characters? Just want to make sure you guys have at least a visual, or that you've at least identified one or two of these supporting cast members. You may not have all of them. Let's hope you don't have all of them, but you'll at least have maybe a couple. So if you do, let us know. It'd be great to know who these, who's more popular in this cast of characters. But we'll identify the saboteurs, and now we're going to move to actively shift into the sage perspective. Nagar, more than one. Yes. Hopefully not all 12 though. Okay. So the sage perspective, we're going to make our shift. What does the sage perspective look like? The biggest thing that the sage perspective does is that it looks for opportunities in every circumstance. And that means out of every painful moment, out of every negative experience, out of even trauma at times, but every circumstance, we can turn it into an opportunity. If we don't, overtly see it at the onset, we have the power to create it. That is the biggest part of the sage perspective. Now, the sage perspective also accepts what is rather than denying it. So, your controller may try to control what's happening and try to deny it by changing and saying, I can change this. This isn't really happening, right? Whether you lost that big client, whether you didn't get the promotion, or, and you want to fight for your job. If you were laid off, you want to fight for your job back, whatever it may be, it accepts what is rather than denies it. And finally, it focuses forward rather than on the immediate. It is not interested in what's happening today from the perspective of, I can fix this right away. It is interested in looking into the future to figure out, what can I do now to actually improve the future, to make the situation better? What could I do? So one of the things you might ask yourself is, let's say something, catastrophic, I put that in quotes, catastrophic happens at work. You might have to sit down and say, what can I do now so that in 3 years' time or 3 months' time, I turn around and I look at this moment as the best thing that ever happened? It's very hard to do, because if we're focused with our saboteurs and in the immediate, we're just kind of, blaming ourselves. Why did I lose that client? Why did they leave me? What's wrong with me? Why couldn't I keep them? But we're not focused on the right things. So the immediate is actually just the negativity of the moment, but being forward thinking and solutions focused is really critical. And being in your PQ brain helps us get there much faster. So just an example, if you were laid off during COVID, can be a devastating thing, right? And may think it's hard to get a job, and you may have gone through a hard time. None of this negates the fact that you're going to go through some difficult times. It will be difficult, but how we handle the difficult time is really what matters. And so if we, again, got laid off during COVID, perhaps we see the opportunity. We know it's going to be difficult, but we see the opportunity to realign ourselves with something we're really passionate about and pivot our career in a different way, or finally start a business, or a whole host of other things. But if we let those saboteurs get in the way, we could really go down that deep well and not see what's possible or the opportunity. So how do we do that? How do we do those three things? How do we gain that sage perspective? Well, you have 5 sage powers. And this is the deepest part of you, and it holds your inner wisdom, which may sound very, as my husband likes to say, kooky for kooky, but it's not. You all know it. You've all probably experienced this inner wisdom at different points in your life. And accessing these powers helps you face all of your challenges stronger, and always offers a superior way of handling the obstacle, because you are operating from your sage brain. So whatever obstacle you're facing, you have 5 powers to lean on. And that is the power to explore, the power to empathize, the power to innovate, to navigate, and to activate. Sounds simple, right? It's not that complicated. What's complicated is actually making the shift, which we'll get to. But how do we do this? How do we use these 5 powers? So as we explore, we want to explore with great curiosity and observe what is without judging or trying to control. That can be very hard to do, but this is where we need to put our focus and our energy into exploring with great curiosity, observe what is without judging or trying to control. Now, that doesn't mean you can't judge yourself. So I don't want to confuse the issue of not listening to your judge and not judging yourself. The difference is that when you're judging yourself from the place of your judge, it's very abusive, it's nasty, and it makes you feel small. If, however, you're actually looking at yourself with curiosity and you can employ discernment, that's the difference. And you can actually have empathy for yourself. So you can first, and I think that's the next one, I believe our photos are covering it, but that's what it says, empathy, where you approach yourself and others with compassion. And you can forgive yourself for being an imperfect human being. And you can see them as well as yourself for the essence that's inside you and not their judge or your judge. So what does this word essence mean? Because that also sounds kooky for kooky in a way, right? But it's really your true self. So just as you developed your saboteurs, primarily the judge, somewhere during your childhood, you were born with all of these sage powers in you. You were born a wonderful, beautiful being that had love in your heart and all of this. And then you had to protect yourself for a whole host of reasons. But if you remember yourself at your core, when you were a child, when things were going well, in your happiest moments, that's you at your essence. And so what the exercise that Shirzad would have you do is, if you're in conflict with another person, to recognize that you are in conflict with their saboteurs, not their essence. So your saboteur is probably ignited by someone else's saboteur, and we create a lot of conflict that way. And if we can stop and explore what's going on with great curiosity and have compassion for ourselves as well as that other person, and try to imagine that other person, even as a child, and what they must have been like as a child, and peel away the saboteurs in your mind and try to communicate with the essence of that person and find that essence. If you can meet them with your essence, their essence will hopefully come out as well. But most importantly, have compassion and empathy for yourself. That's very important. The next one is innovate. So I'm sure you've all heard that expression, yes, and. Right? Well, you need to innovate, and you have the power to do it without judging yourself at every thought. You want to leave every idea that comes to you open and not judge it or dismiss it before really exploring it. So it's a yes and. Activate and appreciate every new idea instead of instantly judging it to find the solutions. And then navigate. So this navigate means that you have your compass internally and you probably know where to go, but maybe you haven't just come to that realization yet. So you can look back at the current moment from the future. You flash forward and you can look back at this current moment, whatever moment you're in, and decide how would you like yourself, your future self, how would your future self hope that you had handled this situation? It sounds so simple, and I think we rarely do that, but it is very powerful to think of yourself in the future, looking back, and hopefully that makes navigating a lot clearer. And then finally is to activate, because the whole reason that we have identified these saboteurs is so that we can intercept them. We want to predict their behavior and we want to be prepared to intercept them. So we want to take action without interference of our saboteurs and get ready for them, get ready for battle in a way. Is this making sense, guys? Let me just take a temperature read on how you are kind of taking this in, if this is relatable, if this sounds like something you think you can implement for yourself, that would be great. But these are really all within you and you can unlock this. And we are going to thumbs up, Katie, awesome. We are going to talk about how to access this in a minute, because that's the most difficult part. So revisit our goal again, make sure we're on track. We've identified the saboteurs. We've actively shifted to the sage perspective. I mean, we know that that's our goal and what we need to do. And to strengthen now this PQ brain. So just to give you a little neuroplasticity lesson, and I'm not a neuro scientist by any stretch, but I'm going to give you the best understanding that I have, and many of you may have an understanding as well. But the pathways that have been created in our brains in a reaction to negative situations through exercising those saboteurs have become so strong through habit. The more our thoughts fire together, they wire together. And our brain is wired now to have these saboteurs just take control. And we often think we don't have the control to take it back. We've got to wait out whether it's negative thoughts or listening to, our judge berate us in our head, but we don't have to. Our aim here, and we're going to do this through the strengthening of the PQ brain, is to create new neural pathways that will automatically become stronger the more we exercise them. So this takes being intentional to do it, to change our behavior, because again, changing behavior is not easy, and that's why only 20% of people reach their full potential. But we can make a difference. So if you see your judge, you hear it, now you have a visual, right? You all imagined the physicality, so maybe you'll actually have a visual image too. But when you feel your judge coming on, you will, first of all, intercept and say, oh, there's my judge. Hi, judge. I see you've come to visit. Great. Sam, I will explain fire together and wire together. So just to give you an example, let's say you make a typo. Let's say I had a typo in this presentation, and all of a sudden, here I am in the middle of the presentation with a typo, and my judge just comes right in and says, Michelle, you didn't proofread. You never proofread. You're so quick to move forward without, taking the precautions necessary to make sure you are well prepared. What is wrong with you? What makes you think that you can pull this off? You should just give up now. This is very embarrassing for you, right? And the fact that those thoughts, so that's a thought, and all of those thoughts, they're firing away together in my brain, and they are going down a path, making that communication through my brain, through the wiring of those neural pathways. So thoughts that fire together, wire together. Hopefully that explained it a bit. So we're going down that negative neural pathway. And what we want to do is recognize that our judge or any of the saboteurs have appeared. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for trying to protect me. I don't really need you, but I got this. Thank you. And shift make the mental shift to the sage perspective, to actively engage in utilizing that sage perspective. Now, that's often hard to do if we don't also have self-command, because that wiring together is so habitual, it is so strong. It's just like if you were trying to navigate, let's say, a different route, on a route that you take almost with your eyes closed. If any of you are still commuting to work, or back in the days when you probably remember kind of being on autopilot. Right? You could have a phone conversation with someone, hopefully not with the phone in your hand, but, on speaker, have a phone conversation, or someone else in the car, and you're paying attention, but you're not really that aware, because you don't need to be. I mean, unless a, car comes to intercept you. But so you could be on autopilot. And if you wanted to change, you would have to be very aware of the new route, of where the stop signs were, of what landmarks to look for to make the turn that you needed to turn to not get lost on this new route. It takes effort. And so shifting takes effort as well. So sometimes just awareness is a huge thing. And I'm sure you all know that awareness in any situation is the first step, and often the biggest step, to making lasting change. It's very hard to let this cast of characters kind of run amok in your brain when you are so aware of them, and it's hard to accept now that you're going to just ignore them. That's number one. But you can actively create new neural pathways so that your thoughts automatically start to take you to, okay, let me explore this situation. Let me see what's going on, and I'm going to try not to judge it. That's going to become more of a habit. Now, the way that we do that is by strengthening the PQ brain. And that's not during times of stress or conflict, but during normal times. We are going to strengthen this muscle the way we would just go to the gym every day. So strengthening the sage is done by PQ reps, this positivity quotient repetitions, muscle repetitions, right? We want to light up our sage brain and create and strengthen these new neural pathways. So let's give it a try. One of the ways, and you can do this with almost all of your senses, but the two that I like the most are first with sound. Okay, we are going to just put your feet flat on the floor if you can. Sit up, relatively straight. You don't want to be uncomfortable, but you don't want to be slouching in the couch. And if you close your eyes, try to hear the sound and focus on the sound furthest away from you. Now, if you're home, it could be someone in the other room, could be the hum of the refrigerator. It could be traffic outside if you can hear anything outside. But really focus on what you hear and what you hear alone. And if thoughts come into your head, try to push them out and just focus. And then shift your attention to the sound closest to you. That may be my voice. It may be your breathing. Really focus on that sound. And this takes practice to do this without letting other thoughts come in your mind. But the more you practice this, the stronger that command, the self-command muscle of being in control of what you choose to think about and how you choose to think, the stronger that muscle gets. So the next one, you can probably keep your eyes closed, although I can't see you, so I don't know if they're really closed. The next one is with touch. And again, just with your feet on the ground, flat. You can put two fingertips together, your two index fingers, and rub them slowly, one against the other, and really focus on that sensation. and try to feel the little ridges in your skin really lightly, but just focus on what that sensation feels like. And now you can have your palms outstretched with your fingers outstretched and rub the fingers of one hand down the palm of the other. You can keep doing that. And then eventually you can shift to the other side. And really focus on what that feels like. I'd love to know, how hard was it for you to focus? I mean, right now, hopefully you aren't experiencing too many negative thoughts, if any, but was it easy to focus? Was it hard to focus? What you're doing is you are, again, exercising that self-command, and your brain can't do two things at once. So if we can quiet the voice of the judge and the other saboteurs, and focus on just these PQ reps. And what I mean in that situation is, if you're experiencing something negative, if you feel this judge and saboteur, you're going to tell them to go away, and you're going to do a PQ rep until, yes, positivity quotient. I will explain that again, Pooja. But you are going to do these reps until you can move into the sage perspective. But as long as you're focusing on something physical, you can't also think. You can't be focused and think. It's just like you can't multitask. That doesn't exist, right? It's called task switching, but you can't do them at the same time. Your brain can't also not do something. So you can't say, I'm not going to think about the saboteurs. Your brain literally cannot not do something. You can't tell it not to do something. You can only tell it to do something. So that's why you have to give it something to do. When you're trying to change behavior, you can't just say, I'm not going to exhibit this behavior. You have to replace that behavior with something else. That's why so many people that try to quit smoking chew gum. They need another behavior. The other thing just about developing new habits and even PQ reps is that habit stacking is very helpful. It's very hard, again, to develop a new habit. So what you want to do is stack the behavior that you want to learn and augment with a behavior that you already do habitually. Brushing your teeth. You do that, and after you brush your teeth, do a PQ rep to get into the habit. Every time you drink a glass of water during the day, do a PQ rep. You only have to do it for about 10 seconds at a time. Every time you wash your hands, which, hopefully we're all still probably doing a lot of, do a PQ rep. So the PQ rep, Pooja, is it's the positivity quotient. And what that refers to is the amount of time we are spending in our sage brain versus our saboteur brain. So the higher PQ we have, the higher our positivity quotient. What that means is that we are spending more time in that sage brain than the saboteur brain. And that's our goal, is to have a really high PQ. And to do that, you do these PQ reps when there isn't a threat or a negative experience or an obstacle or a challenge that you don't know how to face and where the saboteurs may be coming in. You just exercise this muscle. You'll become so much stronger at the self-command that when you identify the presence of your judge or the other saboteurs, you will be able to much more quickly. Hi, Reggie. You will be able to much more quickly make that shift into the sage brain and utilize all of those 5 powers that you have. And hopefully see the opportunity. The opportunities will become clearer to you as you go through those 5 powers. Does that make sense?
So that resonated with Reggie. Sorry, that's my dog.
Yeah, Reggie,
Just to also address Pooja's question, Michelle, when I think about PQ, it helped me to understand kind of the positive psychology foundation of it. So you have emotional intelligence, you have traditional IQ intelligence, and then I think that the third sector is PQ, right? So positivity.
Yes. I mean, this is, yeah. And a lot of the positive intelligence is totally based off of all of the science in positive psychology. I mean, you know, Shirzad Chamine is not a psychologist. He's a coach, and he put this framework together based on a lot of the science. So for example, Dr. Marilee Adams has something called a choice map. It basically is, I believe, the foundational science behind, well, the science is the neurology of the brain. Her methodology of making that shift is letting you know that you have a choice. You have a choice in the questions that you ask yourself. You can either ask yourself questions that will take you down a negative path, right? The questions that the saboteurs ask you. What's wrong with you? Why didn't you get that right? Why was a typo in the presentation? All of those questions. And then you have a choice to either go down that judger path or recognize that you are headed down a negative path that's not serving you and shift gears and go on what's called a learner path. That learner path asks those open questions that are exploratory. What happened? Without the judgment, right? It could say, what did I do? How did I contribute to this? What could I do to make an improvement? Even if it's a small improvement, what can I start doing right now that would improve this situation? What do I need to learn from this? What information do I need to gather to make sure that I'm better prepared next time? I mean, whatever it is, but you're going on a learner path. So it's basically the same concept. It's just a different way to put it. The interesting thing I think about the cast of characters is that we really do all identify with them. You know, we can all identify with having been on a negative trajectory, on the downward spiral, ending up in what Marilee Adams calls a judger pit. But having this cast of characters is important because language is important. We talk to ourselves, and the way we talk to ourselves matters. So if we're using negative language, it's not, you know, we're not going to have a great outcome. It's not going to put us in a broaden and build state. We're not going to be good decision makers or good problem solvers. But if we talk to ourselves in a more positive way, if we have empathy for ourselves, recognize that we're not perfect and that's okay. We don't have to beat up on ourselves for being imperfect, and we have compassion for ourselves, then a lot more is possible, and a lot more is possible faster because we're able to intercept those thoughts and not, you know, spend, you know, you could spend a week in that judger pit.
Well, I love this because this saves years of therapy for many people. But Shirzad Chamine, I love the combination of the psychology aspect of it, but he was a Stanford MBA, and he saw that there were roadblocks that got into the way that he related to people. There were, you know, that got into the way that he reached his goals. So I love this whole concept because it really is very practical and makes you ask yourself these questions. And it seems somewhat commonsensical and logical, but when you really explore it, I think it can really make that major shift for most people. So.
And that's the thing. I mean, you know, so many things are so simple. You could go to the gym every day. That's a pretty simple thing, but how many of us do? Well, don't tell me if you're going to the gym every day, I don't want to know. But the truth of the matter is so many things are simple, but getting ourselves in the frame of mind to actually do it and put it into action is not so simple. And that's why a lot of people work with coaches. I mean, he works with big CEOs, and this is his framework. He does not use another framework other than this. And this works in all areas. This could work in personal areas, in business areas. I think some people have used it to actually lose weight. Instead of eating something, they did a PQ rep to assess how they really felt. Am I really hungry, or am I just angry or stressed or bored? what's really going on. But this simple thing could do a lot. It could be quite powerful. So yes, and he actually was kicked out of the board of a company he started. And at first his saboteurs came up and he said, you know, they're out to get me, and why are they doing this to me? And they're all awful people. He is now very good friends with all of those people because he recognized that he was in his controller and trying to control everything, and was really undoing a lot of the good work that they had done together. And so now he talks about how he's able to see that moment as being so transformative because he said, I saw that they actually cared about me and my vision for the company I started. It was incredibly painful to be thrown off the board, but I saw it now. I can see it with compassion for them, for the decision that they made, that they had to make to take me off it, and for the imperfect person I was in that moment. So if that gives you any idea of how his path has gone and how he's come to all of this.
So Michelle, just bringing it back, there's a question that says, so to sum it up, would you ID the saboteur, reject it, and do a PQ?
Yes. To sum it up, yes. Identify that you have a saboteur present, identify it, try to reject it or say, you know what, thank you, go away, I don't need you, and shift and do a PQ rep so that you can have command, so that they can't take up that space in your brain, and then actively shift to those 5 powers. Absolutely. But in the meantime, do this to practice so that you strengthen those neural pathways, so that you get used to having the command and the ability to shift, because that's the hardest part. Well, we promised you 50 minutes and it's 52 minutes. So I am happy to just say thank you so much. I hope that this has been interesting, enlightening. I hope that this is something you will try. And if you do try this, we would love to hear what results you get, even if it is about not eating as much or about getting rid of the saboteurs or quieting them. Remember, they will always exist. You can't get rid of them, but you can make them smaller. So thank you very much. This work is very foundational to what we do at Monumental Me, and part of our Removing Your Roadblocks program that we will be starting in April, that also includes Gallup Strengths work and goal setting work. If anyone is interested in learning more about that, please definitely let us know. And hopefully you will all enjoy your newsletter. I believe you will be getting, if you're not already on it. Please look out for it every week with just some tips and tricks and thoughts from me and Liana on things to improve ourselves and to help us thrive.